it's the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel to something else. But those are the two tunnels. And so what people do is they get on the BQE because the BQE is direct connections to the Manhattan Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, and the Brooklyn Bridge. And so people just kind of flood this road. It's full of traffic. It's an actual nightmare. So that's one of the main points for the East for tolls on the East River bridges is to relieve congestion on the BQE, which is literally actually falling apart.
Yeah, so the congestion pricing on these bridges is going to hopefully improve the BQE's congestion. And this will allow for necessary construction efforts to extend the lifespan of this crumbling area of the BQE. It's, of course, still going to be used by many commuters, even with congestion pricing. So our ability to extend the lengthen the lifespan of this expressway is necessary for numerous people in the outer boroughs. So this will allow, congestion pricing will allow for fewer cars to take the BQE, which will allow for the city to finally be able to put money into construction on this important expressway.
Yes. So I have a question for you. All right. So Robert's on the pro, I'm on the con. So I don't really like the idea of these tolls. I don't want to be told. So I'm going to show you two different experiences I've had driving. One of these is on a toll road. Actually, two of them. I went over two bridges that had tolls on them. All right. And then another one is of a free road. All right. No tolls. And I want to ask you, the public, the great members of society, which you would rather be driving on. All right. So we're gonna go over here and we're gonna look at our exhibit proof over here. If it ever loads. Oh, look, now we're going slow. Look at that. You telling me you'd have fun in this? It's like watching paint dry. Yeah, no, it's still going. It's still going. It's like 5 miles. So yeah, you saw that right. It took 100 minutes. That's an hour and 40 minutes to go 9.8 miles. That's an average speed of 5.88 miles an hour. You think that's good? You think that's fun? And that's two toll bridges. That was actually the Triborough Bridge and the George Washington Bridge. So I had to pay two tolls and I went 5.88 miles an hour. Now I'm going to show you another video. All right. This road has no tolls. All right. I want to tell you, would you rather be driving on this? I like what I see. So it's very rare that me and the Chinese government agree, but even they can see that this road is a much better deal. I mean, you know what? You can go up to 100. I mean, the speed limit on that road, and you have no problems. All right. So it's very clear to me at this point that the road with no tolls is a much better go than the road with tolls.
So I just first want to mention that is an unfair comparison. Now, the first video I would like to mention was taken on a Friday during rush hour. Now, considering the bridges he mentioned were the Triborough Bridge and the George Washington Bridge, they're some of the most congested bridges in the country already. So, especially the George Washington Bridge, based on how it was built, with numerous lanes all converging into the few lanes that are able to fit over the bridge, creates a huge bottleneck. So obviously he's going to have this horrible traffic experience on the George Washington Bridge. So that is an unfair comparison to the second video, which wasn't even taken in New York City. In fact, it was taken in Suffolk in the hinterlands at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. So no one's going to be out on the roads then, especially in the middle of nowhere where he was. So that's just an unfair comparison.
All right, so I completely disagree with Robert's assessment there, but we're just gonna move on for the sake of time. Where are we going? All righty, Robert, take it away. I want to hear your nonsense point about this environmental impacts.
So the biggest thing that I think will come from congestion pricing is since the more cars are going to be removed from the roads due to these tolls, we're going to have less exhaust and less greenhouse gas emissions. The greatest generator of greenhouse gases in New York City is car exhaust. And when the US rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, New York pledged to do its part as the largest city in the US to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the city and created a plan to go carbon neutral by 2050. And by implementing congestion pricing, fewer people will use their cars to commute and will use more sustainable, cleaner means of transport, such as the subways or the select bus service.
All right, now, first of all, before I go rebutting Robert's point, I feel like it is necessary to state that I am a paid employee of the ExxonMobil Corporation, so everything that I'm about to say must be taken with a small grain of salt. But climate change just clearly isn't real. I mean, look at some fellow-minded individuals over here. We got some graphs. We have some scientific data. We have actual proof that climate change is not real. I mean, we've got my middle school science teacher over there, got a big red X over him because he's talking all this nonsense about like the trees going brown or something. I don't know. Look, it's not real, so we don't need to worry about climate change. So Robert's entire point there is completely moot. And then another thing I want to address about Robert's plan is that all he wants to do is toll the East River crossings, all right? But you're forgetting the Harlem River, all right? There's tons of free bridges on the Harlem River. So now all these people that were just going to go on the East River bridges, what's stopping them from going up to Harlem and just going through the Bronx?
Because you can't go from Queens and Brooklyn to the Bronx without going over some tolled road or bridge. It's impossible. And, you know, that the entire point of this congestion pricing is to make sure that there are no, ways to get around these tolls. They thought of this.
Okay, so I disagree with your point on this point. Is in the 1960s, they actually made a car called the Amphibicar. Now, this was a wonderful automobile. You could actually drive it into the water, and it basically became a boat. So what I'm asking you is what is preventing people from going over the Harlem River bridges, all right, then driving down, to the shores of the Bronx, and then just, boating over to Queens, and then getting on the LIE or whatever. What's preventing them from doing that, Robert?
Probably the fact that these cars didn't work and they were taken out of the market years ago. And also, I don't think that there are roads that connect to the water line.
Fair point, Robert. See. All right. Now, what you got to say about this public transport? I hear that you're going to take these the funding from the roads and you're going to put them into the MTA. Tell me a little about that.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the best things about congestion pricing is that both the tolls that are paid on the roads and also since we're going to try to get as many people off the roads as possible with these tolls, it's going to force these people to use public transport. Which means that the fares they're going to pay will go into the MTA, and these tolls that are being paid will also go to fund the MTA. And this will improve the MTA's services, and it therefore will increase the appeal of mass transit, meaning more people will want to take mass transit. So I feel like, congestion pricing when it comes to funding the MTA and making public transit more appealing to the people who don't normally use public transit. It's just going to create this positive loop of funding for the MTA that will continue to improve it. And this is really one of the things that I was discussing when it came to the environment. We have a great public transit system here in New York City that uses electric and, they're a major part of the plan to go carbon neutral by 2050. So if we're able to, put this congestion pricing in place, it'll persuade people to use mass transit more, and that will benefit not only our city, but also the world in general.
Okay, so Robert's talking all this nonsense about public transit. Let me ask you, the great people of the public, you want to go on a stinky bus or you want to go in your lovely car, all right? So what? So first of all, let me just say that my main man, Robert Moses here, my idol, all right, he had none of that public transit nonsense. He had none of that subways, none of those buses, nada. Okay, he actually made the overpasses on the parkways lower, so you couldn't get a bus through it because he's just that much of a genius. All right. So you're telling me that my main man, who said that you can go everywhere in a car. A car is it's cleaner, it's safer, it's faster, it's cheaper. So why would I not just get in a car? Why would I toil the reputation of my idol and go take a bus?
Okay, first of all, what you just said about cars being faster and cheaper is not true. In fact, it's not even close to true. If you were to drop a nuclear bomb on Truth, that wouldn't even be in the blast radius. The thing is, cars are so much more expensive yearly than public transit. I mean, think of this. You've got to pay for insurance, registration, parking, gas. You're eventually going to have, wear and tear on the car the more you use it. All that's going to add up yearly. Now, think of public transit. It's a flat rate every time you use it. You're going to use it every day, maybe once or twice. So, it's going to cost a lot less than whatever you're paying for insurance or whatever maintenance you need to do on your car every year. And also, if you want to drive in because you don't think that you can carry your poster of Robert Moses on the subway, believe me, I've carried posters on the subway before.
Hey, Robert, it appears you got me. But at this point, we're going to open up this conversation to the public. Robert, me, and my poster of Robert Moses. We're going to, anything you have to say, whether you're on Robert's side, whether you're on my side, whether you're somewhere in the middle, we want to hear what you have to say. So let me just move that slide over there. And I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah.
Also, guys, excuse me. Yeah, let me just interject here. If you have any questions or comments for either or both of the presenters, make sure you use your raise hand button on your computer so you can be acknowledged. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, and Connor, don't forget the last slide.
Oh, the last slide. Oh yeah, we have a little extra tidbit about Fiorella LaGuardia. We found some beautiful pictures of New York City's best mayor to compliment. You have to have Robert Moses. You got to have the counterpart to Robert Moses. So we have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. All right. Now back to the conversation. Who has opinions? Just not even if you don't have questions, maybe just say what you think about congestion pricing, whether we should, whether we shouldn't. Floor is yours.
Floor is yours. There's no test on this, by the way.
Yes, Brian.
I personally think we shouldn't have congestion pricing. New Yorkers already have really crazy rent prices, and they have to worry about their commute time and whatnot. So adding like a toll would only make things worse.
An interesting rebuttal to that point would be the fact that the majority of people that do commute by car into Manhattan are people who are upper class, more or less, because it is so expensive to own a car in New York City. It's been shown statistically that the majority of people who fall below a certain median income do actually take public transit instead. So this would not be so detrimental to like average people so much as it would be, more of like a slight pain to people who can afford to actually pay these tolls. Yes, Daniel.
So Booza before in the evidence of whatever slide referred to the second video as being in the hinterlands. That was by my house. Connolly was on his way to my house for a speech tournament going 100 miles per hour. Now, the way that this relates back to what I want to ask is that, like you said, the majority of people coming into the city by car are people who live in the suburbs. Connolly, you live in outer Queens, you live in the Rockaways, and you use your car also to come to me. And congestion pricing on the bridges wouldn't really affect whether or not you started using public transit, because you still need to have a car to do things like driving 100 miles per hour down 231 trying to get to West Islip Road. So I don't know that congestion pricing, if so much of the population of the road, or these suburban people commuting in and out of the city, would really affect it that much, unless you really expanded the MTA as well into the suburbs and really expanded the service that it provides.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that's one point that I think that, we should have mentioned earlier, is that these prices on the bridges now, the $11.52 toll, they are not set prices. That's what it's going to start as, but they still are up for debate. We can lower them if necessary, if things change and more people begin to commute into the city. One thing that was brought up in a few community board meetings in Brooklyn was from small business owners who were worried that these tolls would negatively affect them. And it was said that you're only going to pay the toll once a day, and you're still, and these prices can always, change for certain groups. Like emergency vehicles don't get the toll applied to them. So with that same technology in mind, we can change the prices for certain, services that are using these bridges.
Also, we can't, as Danny said, we can't escape the fact that a lot of the suburbs that we've created, especially in Westchester and Long Island, are completely car dependent, completely the fault of this one individual. But yeah, that's a fair point, because these people, like, they can drive, like even if they go to take a train, which like the LIRR Metro North have really good train service. So it makes a very good case for taking public transit. But a lot of people live in areas where they end up driving to the train station, and then they'll drive home. And then when they're at home, because they live in a car dependent suburb, they have to go drive 4 miles to go do something, or like 8 miles in the other direction to go to Costco or something like that. So that is a valid point, in that you can't stop them from driving in around their areas, because they basically have to in the way that we design the areas. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to relieve congestion on the most on the thickest arterials, because if you think about it, you will get a greater amount of pollution when you have idling. So you have cars that are going, like, for example, 5.88 miles an hour on average. They're sitting there and they're polluting. They're polluting, like, the engine isn't working as hard, because say it's at 1500 RPM instead of 2000 RPM. But at the same time, they're sitting there and they're moving slowly. Whereas if you have a car going 60 miles an hour, the impact of your pollution is going to be a lot less there. So there's a lot of different things to consider there. Yes, Alex.
I like the idea generally. I do support it. My one thing is, if the money's going to go to mass transit, there's going to be a pretty big gap in time between where, like, the money starts going to mass transit and when, like, the average person starts seeing the effects of it. And so I think once, like, the average New Yorker starts seeing how mass transit is getting better because of congestion pricing, it'll be good. But I think in between that time, there will be a lot of tension.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of.
That's definitely true. I feel like, though, if people are arguing, oh, we shouldn't put these in place because it's going to be so long before anyone sees a change, then how is change going to happen? If people are just won't let things happen because they feel like it'll be too long before we start to see the changes, then nothing's ever going to happen.
I'd like to also highlight another congestion reducing project that's not directly related to East River Crossing, but in Portland, Oregon in the 70s, they actually tore out one of their freeways, which was revolutionary for the time. And they got a lot of complaints in the beginning, because now people had to either use the bypass or they had to go on city streets. It increased their travel time a little. But after a while, because the river became less polluted and they actually turned it into this gigantic park that runs along the Willamette River, they had a lot of positive feedback. So with a lot of these projects, you do have that initial pushback where everyone is against it because it interrupts their flow and it makes it harder to drive a car. But at the same time, people begin to realize that there's a reason we're trying to make it harder to drive cars, is because cars are the problem. And that we actually have a solution. We happen to live in a city that has very good public transit. We have alternative options to driving a car. And so this is sort of a way to wake up people to those other forms of mass transit that, as Robert mentioned in one of his points, may actually be cheaper than just, or not just may, it usually is cheaper than just driving in Tez.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Ansom said several times about how the biggest, like, cause of pollution in the city is driving, and we're already too crowded. So I feel like something needs to be done. And if this will decrease, driving, and also put the money somewhere else, places like the MTA or other places. I mean, everything needs money in the city, but that's a source of revenue, and maybe it would help, the environmental cause, because I mean, that's a pretty pressing issue. I think congestion pricing seems kind of like the way to go. When we keep trying to make driving harder, it's not working. It's just getting more crowded, and parking obviously in the city is terrible. So I feel like congestion pricing, I think, is a strong case for that. Environmentally, at least.
All right, anyone else?
Do you still have a question, or is that a residual hand? Okay, all right. Happage?
Yeah, so you mentioned like the solution that they thought of in Oregon, but like given that like New York has like a much bigger population, like do you think like something like that is possible in New York, or because it's like such a much bigger population, they have to stick with congestion pricing? And if they do stick with that, like do you think it'll have as big of an impact as it did in other cities?
Well, there are certain routes in New York that you just couldn't tear out, the Cross Bronx being one of them, unfortunately, because you do have like international traffic. So like for that, a solution like Oregon's wouldn't work. Because of the congestion of trucks, you would have to keep something like the BQE, but there's the possibility that you could convert it into a truck only route, which would help ease congestion, and it would be beneficial for local residents. And because these freeways, when you have congestion, they also cause the pollution is harmful to the population. So you'll see in areas like by the Cross Bronx, by the Bruckner, that you'll see elevated levels of asthma within the population. You can also do things. Here's another project is in Seattle, Washington. They actually tore down this big double-decker freeway, not unlike the BQE, and they actually put it inside of a tunnel, which not only reduced congestion because they were able to add another lane, which has its own problems. There's the whole issue of induced demand when you add a lane, but it put everything underground. So Seattle's actually finally been able to reclaim the waterfront that's been sort of missing for all those years. And the BQE is kind of like the BQE does obstruct views of the water. Again, and not directly related to East River bridges, but at the same time, the BQE is a product of the East River bridges. So I think, yeah, that's an important thing to consider.
Speaking about the BQE, a personal story here, all right? I remember when the BQE was finally completed around 1957. In 1956, when they had the World Series in Brooklyn, President Eisenhower, who was running for a second term, attended the game. And then he had to come through. There was no BQE yet, so he had to use all local streets to get from central Brooklyn to LaGuardia Airport. All right, even with a motorcade, that still took close to 40 minutes for him to do that. Two things have happened to sabotage the BQE. All right, my father was a civil engineer. He built roads, although he was not involved in the BQE project as such. And the first time he saw the road, he looked just with a trained eye and said, very bad workmanship. So that was part of it. The other reason why a lot of the roads are crumbling is because of technology. The trucks are bigger and wider than they used to be. And so there's more stress put on the roads, and that's why these roads have to be refurbished. All right. And to Alex's question about the revenue that's generated, right? I mean, this is obviously a two-pronged issue. Number one, you want to, it's an environmental issue. Number two, it creates a revenue stream. New York City was not built for the automobile. And it's not we have a large population, we have a dense population. We have a population density. We have a lot of people crammed into a small area here. All right. And the revenue can go one of two ways, Alex. It can either be used to subsidize the fare to get the MTA out of debt, which would keep the fare where it is for a long time. And of course, people would appreciate that. or the money could be pumped into capital projects, like they're talking about extending the Second Avenue subway, adding a couple of stations and getting it up to 125th Street. Obviously, a very worthwhile project. All right. So what happens with the revenue is very, very important as well. This could not have been done 30 years ago because we didn't have the technology of Easy Pass. When Ed Koch was mayor, he proposed something that the court shot down very quickly. If you were coming over the 59th Street Bridge, which ironically is now named for Mr. Koch, when you're coming over the 59th or the Queensboro Bridge, if you were coming into Manhattan on any of the free bridges, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, et cetera, during the morning rush hour, you would not be allowed in if the car was a single occupant. The only way the car would come in would be as if they were more than one person. Obviously, you want a carpool. That would have been very difficult to implement because we're going to have policemen standing at the plaza saying, okay, you come and you go back. And so the technology was not, it just wasn't feasible. The other thing that Connor was talking about, there used to be something called the West Side Highway. Right? The West Side Highway started at 72nd Street and went all the way down to the Battery, to the tunnel, Battery Tunnel, which is now, you're right, Connor, it's now the Hugh Carey Tunnel. And what's the difference between a parkway and a highway? Or a parkway and an expressway? Daniel?
Parkway has like grass and trees on the side of it.
It's also restricted in what way?
Oh, no commercial vehicles, right?
No commercial vehicles, right? And of course, some people kind of finesse that or game that system too. All right. So the Henry Hudson Parkway ends at 72nd Street and the Hudson River. And then south of 72nd Street was the West Side Highway. All right. In 1972, they had to close the West Side Highway because it had become structurally dangerous. They had to tear it down because it was going to collapse. All right. The city got money during the Reagan administration to build something called Westway, which basically would have been an underground road. The money was never used for that. And what happened with that money is anybody's guess. All right. They now have what they call West Street, which is kind of a broad street that runs down the side of Manhattan, the west side of Manhattan, to the Battery Tunnel. And then it hooks around the Battery and becomes the FDR Drive going north. All right. Supposedly that money could be traded in for mass transit. There was also a proposal when Michael Bloomberg was mayor. He introduced the concept of congestion pricing. You know how he wanted to do it? Any car coming in south of 96th Street. Okay. You know who was vociferous in opposition to that? People that you all know. I'm going to take a guess. The Regis faculty. Because if you haven't noticed, we're south of 96th Street. All right. In fact, I made a recommendation for JFR Day this year. Since we're talking about climate change, how about nobody come to Regis that day by car? All right. If we allowed weapons in this school, some faculty would have knifed me in the back already. So take that for what it's worth. All right. So, I mean, congestion pricing is, now, Connor or Rob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. When is it supposed to go into effect?
So what I read was it was supposed to go into effect this past year, but COVID put that implementation on hold. So it's going to go into effect in 2023. And Mayor Adams has said that he's in support of this, so he'll make sure that it goes into effect.
Right. Isn't that a nice feeling to say Mayor Adams? Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? You guys put on very entertaining slides today.
We tried.
No, seriously, it was your presentation was very good. Okay. The whole idea. Well, by the way, somebody said, I think Robert, you said it was impossible to get from Brooklyn to the Bronx without using a toll road.
Based on my research, that's what it seemed.
You can do that.
Ah.
All right, you can go over the Brooklyn Bridge, up the FDR Drive, and over the Harlem River Bridge into the Bronx, and you wouldn't have to pay 5 cents. The problem with that is somebody said, well, why don't you just drive up the side of Manhattan to avoid the tolls? What you end up spending in gasoline offsets the toll. All right, and plus it's more time consuming. Even with the traffic on the toll roads, it's more time consuming slugging your way up the east side of Manhattan. So, you know, that doesn't necessarily work the way you think it might. Okay. By the way, who owns those the toll roads now? Anybody know? Who owns the toll roads? For example, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which oversaw the toll roads, and right, that was a creation of Robert Moses. All right, who owns those roads now? Matt?
The Port Authority?
No, not the Port Authority. The Port Authority owns the George Washington Bridge, the New Jersey, the subways that run in the Hudson River subway. Do any of you use that? The Port Authority Trans-Hudson subway? Okay. But who owns the, for example, the Triborough Bridge now? Connor?
MTA Bridges and Tunnels.
All right, the MTA, all right. And there's a very good reason for that. And this is, again, this is another argument. Every time you raise the subway fare, it was predictable that fewer people would take the subway and take the car. So what they had to do is when they raised the fare, you'd have to raise the toll concurrently. That's why they put that. Now, if there were no subsidies of mass transit, by the way, who's doing the mass transit debate? Alex, who's your partner, Alex?
Michael Donnelly.
Okay. Did you know that, Mike, or is this coming as a surprise to you?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
You know, you look like you were totally out of left field here. All right. If there were no subsidies in mass transit, you know what a subway ride would cost you? And want to take a guess? Steve?
$7.
How much?
7.
Yeah, it's somewhere around $7, $8, more or less. All right. Obviously, an $8 subway fare would be completely intolerable. No way that anybody would sit still for that. Okay. So basically, what you're doing, the MTA is taking money that they get from tolls and giving it over to mass transit. So drivers are subsidizing public transportation users. Okay. I don't have a problem with that, but there are a lot of people who do. Okay. One of the very few things that Bill de Blasio did right, he had a thing about, but again, because of his fecklessness, he just never followed through on it. Vision Zero. All right. In other words, he did things to make it more difficult to drive a car unnecessarily, or at least he anticipated doing that. Right? And of course, you know, parking. I forget who's it. Is it Tazio? Did you say about parking?
Yeah.
Parking. You know, parking is a nightmare. And of course, that's even worse now. Two things have made parking worse. the city bike program, and outdoor dining. All right, we've lost a few thousand parking spaces between those two things over the last few years. So, and of course, then you have alternate side as well, where you have to move your car anyway. The purpose of alternate side was to give the Department of Sanitation a chance to clean the gutter on that street, which they don't do. But that's another issue about the inefficiency of the Department of Sanitation. Okay. Anybody else have any strong feelings one way or the other about this?
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
This was just more of a side question. For the neighborhood study, could you go over the format again for that, please?
Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to do a little bit of research on the history of the neighborhood, let's say post-World War II. And what's happened, you know, how has it changed ethnically, economically? Also, too, in the neighborhood, what is the housing stock mostly? Is it multiple dwellings? Is it 1 and 2 family houses? Right? What's the principal ethnic group, or what has been the principal ethnic group? What is the per capita income? All right, what is the population? How's the population distributed? Those kinds of things. All right. All right. I should have mentioned this earlier, and it might be too late to do it now, but if you had the opportunity to do this, taking a walking tour of the neighborhood that you selected, you know, just go down that neighborhood one and spend a couple hours just walking up and down the streets and observing things. All right, so you would that would be another aspect of the neighborhood study. All right, what is the major business? What is the major commercial activity? If it's a commercial neighborhood as opposed to a residential neighborhood, and so on and so forth. So those are the kinds of things we're looking for. It should have still some statistics, but don't get statistic heavy. Okay. All right, Connor?
Can you include photos to demonstrate change?
Yeah, if you wish. Okay, guys, remember this is a research paper now, so all of that word implies about research, you know, citation, footnotes, and works cited, and so on and so forth. Okay, all right. This should run you no more than 3 pages, 3 pages of text. 2 to 3 pages of text. Okay, so we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 1,000 words, if that much. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Daniel?
I just wanted to point out that Connor's name is Connor Connolly, and he was on the con side of the argument. Thought that was pretty cool. Maybe we should call him the con man.
And it took you the better part of 40 minutes to figure that out.
No, just to say it.
Oh. Well, everyone's brain gets congested once in a while. Okay. Okay, now our next class will be on Tuesday. Hopefully we won't be in these Brady Bunch rectangles much longer. Do we have a discussion on Tuesday? Anybody scheduled to discuss? I don't have my schedule in front of me. Is Tuesday a discussion date? Don't answer at once.
I don't know.
I think it's next Friday.
Next Friday. Okay. All right. So why don't we leave it there for today? Thanks to our presenters, and enjoy the weekend, guys. And hopefully I'll see you in person next Tuesday.
All right. See you, con man.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.